also we recognize what is happening under the AU CAADP Marabou commitment and towards the Sustainable Development Goals of Food Systems Summit that I lead is now working on, recognizing fully well that in both areas, the Marabou commitments and Sustainable Development Goals, we are behind on some of the most critical areas on zero hunger, on nutrition and malnutrition, but also on climate change, like I just said. We are contributing to biodiversity loss. 80% biodiversity loss comes from agricultural systems, and agricultural systems are contributing 30% to climate change. So let's focus on ensuring that these frameworks that we had already put in place from an African continent perspective, but also from a global perspective, let's focus on ensuring that these frameworks work, and more importantly, let's focus on ensuring that they work for smallholder farmers. Lastly, I want to recognize that this is a time to build back better. I want to recognize that our smallholder farmers have been challenged just like everybody else in our community. Use the opportunity that the Food Systems Summit is offering and be able to double down on efforts that will ensure equity, will ensure better livelihoods, and will ensure better incomes for smallholder farmers. I want to appreciate the work that farmers do, but I also want to appreciate the Farmers Forum as the opportunity that we have and farmers have to bring issues to the attention of all stakeholders, to bring issues to the forefront, and to bring the issues that the continent is struggling with, from ending hunger, from equity, from challenges that face women and youth employment, which is a big challenge on our continent, the opportunity that we have in our midst right now is to bring these issues to the fore. And no group of people is more credible than the Farmers Forum to present these issues on behalf of farmers.
All right. So as we said, these are issues that are affecting farmers. That is what we are discussing on this edition of the Nation Leadership Forum. And on that note, I have two farmers with me this evening. One of them is based in Eldoret, and her name is Ruth Maraba. Ruth, happy to have you with us this evening. We're also joined by Arthur Nsubuga. I hope I said it right, Arthur, and he is joining us all the way from Uganda.
No,
I am in Nairobi, in case I didn't mention it. We also have Dr. Geoffrey Kirenga, who's joining us from Tanzania, and he is the CEO of SAG Court. All right, there we have it. Those are our three panelists this evening. We're expecting a fourth. I will introduce him when he becomes available to us. This is the first of two sessions that are taking place this evening. The second one will take place at 7:30 p.m. on NTV Kenya and NTV Uganda from 8 p.m. So do stay tuned for that as well. And I will be handing that baton over to my colleague, Smriti Vidyarthi. But first, let's get the ball rolling. Ruth, what has dominated, I think, the last year is the COVID pandemic. How has the COVID pandemic treated you as a farmer?
Thank you so much. COVID-19 pandemic has really threatened Africans' food security, and it has really given a lot of challenges to the farmers. It has made food a very rare commodity, especially when it comes to the chain value of the food commodities in our regions. So, because at times when transporting the food to the market, it's been a bit tricky. So, COVID-19 has really impacted so much in our farmers. So, we always think of climate change and COVID-19. So, personally, I've seen a lot of people suffering when it comes to COVID-19 pandemic, and it has really affected Africans' food system and the livelihoods of the farmers in our region.
All right, thank you, Ruth. Arthur, Ruth introduced the aspect of climate change. How has climate change impacted you as a farmer and your community?
I think the biggest challenge with climate change on our side, of course, is the unpredictable weather. It's been difficult to determine when to plant crops. So you find that farmers on many fronts end up planting maybe just way before the rains and end up losing the seed. And seed is quite expensive. So if you plant way before the rain and you can't determine when the rain will come in, you lose that expensive seed. So you find the farmers have made losses because of depending on when the rain will come. And of course, even the weather predictions sometimes have been very inaccurate. Either you have a very long dry season, or you have a very long wet season. So the problem with a long wet season is that you can't, you essentially lose your crop. It can't, because it needs a bit of warmth to mature, but end up losing your crop because there's not enough warmth for the crop to mature, and so they can be able to take it to the market. So that unpredictable weather has been very difficult for the farmers in Uganda. And of course, irrigation is still a big issue in a country because of the cost of irrigation equipment within the country, especially for smallholder farmers. You would find that lining up an acre of land for irrigation can be too expensive for your typical smallholder farmer. So the weather is unpredictable, and also the mechanisms to mitigate the risks are also still a bit unaffordable for the typical smallholder farmer.
All right, thank you, Arthur. And I'd like to bring in Geoffrey at this point. Geoffrey, you're in Tanzania. What does the situation look like there? Because we've not only had to contend with the impacts of climate change, like Arthur mentioned, unpredictable rain patterns, but we've had to deal with the COVID pandemic, which led to the closure of markets. We've also had to deal with the locust invasion. What is the situation like in Tanzania?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. The situation in Tanzania is not very different from other countries, but I can say as far as climate change is concerned, the farmers are also affected. Although Tanzania has been able to have a very good harvest for a couple of years now, almost a decade and more, we are producing more than what we are consuming, but still there are other products which we are importing from outside. However, on the issue of unpredictability of weather, that is a challenge. We see that it is difficult for farmers to manage their cropping calendars as they used to do in the past. But also we see maybe rainfall finishing, or the cycle of rain completing its cycle before the crop has matured. As far as the pandemic is concerned, Tanzania did not experience lockdown as other countries. Therefore, we did most of the agricultural production as we have always been doing it, but we see the importance now to make sure that all the advice that you are given is adhered to. At the moment, we are now implementing social distancing, also staying clean, but also we have started the vaccination campaign in the country. And if you have noticed recently, we have also started to publish data on the situation in Tanzania. There is an impact economically, especially for the agricultural sector. We saw the horticultural industry be the one which is most affected, and also the closure and also suspension of services in various institutions, especially the tourist sector. That has caused a number of challenges, especially in the suppliers of livestock and crops that are normally consumed in those tourist cycles and other urban areas. But that's what I can say at the moment. We see also levels of investments going down, also affected by this. It's difficult now to do investment as compared to what used to be in the past, which of course was not in good state, but this situation has worsened the situation that was also not very good even before the pandemic. But what I can say, it's important to notice these problems, and we're putting measures now to correct the situation.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Kirenga. And speaking of measures to correct the situation, Ruth, the unpredictable weather patterns are not limited to Uganda, because that is an issue that Arthur raised. As a farmer, how are you adapting to these unpredictable weather patterns?
Yeah, in Kenya, farmers actually had to adapt because climate change constitutes a significant threat to food security and even poverty reduction in Kenya. So food system is severely off-targeted in meeting development, and it has really affected our farmers. And the government has really tried so much. You have come up with so many policies. We are coming up with a lot of capacity building workshops for the farmers, because climate change is becoming real now. We used to tell our farmers to plant trees. We used to tell our farmers so many things. But currently, they have seen it, they have accepted it, and they have really known that climate change is real. It has affected our food groups because whenever they were planting to plant food groups, it became a bit bad because they could not do that. The pattern changed. We used to plant other food crops like beans, and currently we don't have any beans in Kenya. So climate change has really affected so many farmers, especially in the North Rift region and part of the South Rift region of Kenya.
All right, thank you, Ruth. Arthur, coming at this point, how are you coping with these? There's been flooding. How you mentioned, as I keep repeating, the issue of unpredictable rain patterns. How are you coping on your end?
If I'm speaking for myself, one thing that I do as a farmer, of course, I have an irrigation scheme, but of course, like I mentioned, that is quite expensive for a typical farmer. So, but something else I'm doing is that I'm trying to diversify my farming, because I plant coffee and I plant bananas, but I've also had to plant a forest on my farm, because that's one of my simple contributions to kind of reversing climate change, and it's something that I'm trying to encourage people to do, to get into reforestation. But also, it's important for even for the smallholder farmers to find out optimizing their land, as in they need to include more than just food crops on their small land. I mean, if you could do some bit of reforestation or adding a bit of a tree cover on your land, that helps to also, in a small way, as a reverse climate change. Because we have a lot of smallholder farmers. You can imagine if all these millions of smallholder farmers could do just a little bit of tree planting on their pieces of land, that can aggregate to reverse the situation. So it's something that I'm trying to encourage people to do, to get into reforestation, but also to optimize their pieces of land in such a way that can be more productive. I mean, if they can't afford irrigation systems, they can afford to mulch their banana plantations, for example. They can do so many things to deal with the adverse weather if they can't really afford irrigation. So I'm encouraging optimization of pieces of land and reforestation.
All right, thank you, Arthur. And Dr. Kirenga, let me bring you in at that point. Arthur has raised some of the ways that we can address climate change, for example, reforestation, diversification of the crops we plant. What are some of the other technologies and adaptive strategies that we can employ to address the challenges of climate change?
Thank you. I will respond to your questions by looking at two things. First of all is the technologies and the second issue is the systems approach that you're putting in place. One of the areas, let me start with the systems approach. Actually, in my organization, we are working with the government, the development partners and the private sector to develop a system whereby we work under the public-private partnerships, whereby the public investment is directed towards promoting measures such as infrastructure, building and repairing. You know, climate change, you mentioned floods, they can damage the roads and things of that nature, to make sure that crops and inputs will go into and out of the farms. We also work with the government to make sure that technologies such as improved seeds that can withstand the climate change is much more available to the government, by government putting measures that can put that seed in the market, but also research and development to develop them. And we are also working with the private sector to make sure that the private sector do invest in inclusive development. And we have worked with them to develop what we call the Inclusive Green Growth Initiative in Tanzania, whereby we have put up measures which have put together all the technological issues which is needed to combat issues of climate change and other challenges that farmers are facing. And these measures looks on things like how can you judiciously use inputs, but also you can control pests and diseases. And also we are looking on the measures of looking at the soil, because everything starts with the soil. So issues of soil health is very important. We are teaching farmers how to conserve the organic matter content, but also measures like using soil correcting inputs, especially liming where there's soil acidity, and gypsum where you have soil salinity, and planting densities, and also issues of judicious use of water, water-saving technologies. All these are being promoted, and it's very important to say that it's not only being promoted in the medium and large-scale farmers, but we have found ways to connect farmers with those technologies. Companies are encouraging to invest and distribute these technologies to farmers. There you are also creating businesses to those companies, but also we are encouraging private sector to train smallholder farmers in public-private partnership arrangements. And this has been working very effectively. Actually, I can say, if you look at a crop like maize, which is very important, especially in the Southern Highlands, we have discovered that if you take care of your soil and you make sure that your soil is healthy, that is as important measure, because it actually triple your productivity in that particular area. And also it empowers, or it enables the crop to survive and escape climate change challenges. Let me stop here, and I will wait for any other opportunity to contribute more on this.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kirenga. I can understand why you're so passionate about this topic, and you do understand quite a bit about it. I did mention, and I did promise that we'd have a fourth panelist with us tonight, and that is the ED and the CEO of the East African Business Council, and that is John Bosco. Good to have you with us on set. John Bosco, my question to you is this. Why is this an important conversation to have? I know smallholder farmers are about, 7 out of 10 of the farmers on the continent. Agriculture is the backbone of many an economy. Why is it important to have this conversation as regards climate change and how it affects them?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for organizing this national dialogue. Yeah, it is important to talk about the resilience, especially in our farming sector, given its importance in our livelihood, given its importance in our economy. When you look at the statistics, the agriculture sector contributes around 35% of our GDP, and it employs a substantial number of our people, especially both rural and urban. So before the COVID, it was one of the dynamic sector we had in the region. So discussing the resilience and sustainability of this sector is very critical in terms of building our capabilities, the regional and national capabilities, in terms of how do we reshape and refocus our value chain at the national level and at the regional level. When you look at the sector itself, it has what we call both backward and forward linkages. It has a positive or trickle-down effects to other sectors of the economy, both the light manufacturing and including even services. So it is really a critical sector that we need to reflect and review its performance, as well as how the system works, from the both smallholder farmers to the processors, distributors, even to the final consumers, because each segment of the society is affected by this sector. So I think it is very critical and important that we look at, we build back the sector and look at what we did well and what is its strength as well as its weaknesses, and how can we support the sector in terms of building its resilience.
All right, thank you, John. I'd like to bring back Ruth. John, we have two farmers on board. We have Ruth in Eldoret and we have Arthur in Uganda. Ruth, you represent a federation of farmers, and there are these technologies that Dr. Kirenga made reference to, talking about why it's important to address soil, right, and how water is used and access to seeds that can withstand the effects of climate change. How accessible have these technologies been to your members?
Thank you, Madam. In my federation, that is Kenya National Farmers Federation, we decided to come up with a target. We targeted, we want to plant 50 billion trees by the year 2030, and we have worked with the government. We have ensured that any farmer in our federation plants trees in his garden. If he has more than 10 acres, he is allowed to plant almost 10,000 trees in his or her farm. So from that, we realized that it can make a lot of impact, a lot of deforestation will reduce, and even secondly, we, as a federation, we decided to support the small-scale farmers to plant trees even in their compounds, even in their yards. And at the end of the day, we realized it's going to make a lot of impact. So as per our previous planting, because of the target, we realized that we can even achieve the 50 billion trees before the year 2030. And because climate change is real, our farmers are even supporting this through the partnerships. Everybody is willing even to buy. And at times, some have come up with a strategy that if you are 20 years, you plant 20 seedlings. If you are 50 years, so you just plant as per your age. And we realize that it has made a lot of impact because people enjoy seeing trees. People know that trees are lives, and it makes a lot of impact at the end of the day. Those areas which have not been raining for some time has really done so well because of the trees plantation and even the coming up of seedlings. In my federation, it is group-based, it's non-political, and most of the groups have decided to come up with tree nurseries. And we have seen a lot of impact because even purchasing of seedlings is becoming a bit cheaper. And those ones who have tree nurseries are assisting the other groups who are not stable. So it has made a lot of impact. And from the look of things, before the year 2030, our country will have been covered by the trees in those years.
All right. Arthur, let me bring you in at that point. How accessible is this, are these technologies to you in terms of, I know you said you're diversifying your crops, there's reforestation, but there are also all these other inputs that Dr. Kirenga made reference to: access to seed, access to fertilizer, access to credit. I was just looking at some statistics, and when I visited the AGRA website, and I saw that despite the agriculture sector contributing, I think, John, you said 35% yes. to the GDP, they get less than 10% private lending. How accessible is credit to you, for instance?
I love talking about credit because it's one of my passions, and I get to do a bit of work on the side in that credit industry. Crediting for the smallholder farmer is still a big problem in Uganda. We have facilities that are sponsored by the development partners, credit facilities, but the challenge is that they're designed for what I'll call the midstream of the value chain. They're designed for processors, they're designed for off-takers of the crops, they're designed for people who are into packaging the crop. So they have terms and conditions which a typical farmer up-country can't manage. For example, you can't ask a typical farmer to come up with physical collateral. So because of such terms and conditions, these farmers miss out on this credit. The other thing is that this credit is disbursed through commercial banks, which don't necessarily reach the farmers who are typically off-grid. So the farmers miss out on this credit. Because they miss out on this credit, they're not able to afford what you can call quality seeds, even quality fertilizers, because quality comes with a premium. It comes with a cost. So if you can't get good credit, that means you can't get good seeds and good fertilizers. So credit starts this business, and credit can kill this business. That's what it is. So the typical off-grid farmer misses out on these facilities. So there's need for the government to rethink the design of these facilities. And they need to involve the farmers or get down to the ground and see what are the challenges that these farmers actually face, because they don't own, most of them don't even own land. So you can't ask me for a land title as collateral to give me credit when I don't have a land title. Most of them are on communal land. You can't get a land title for communal land. So they miss on these facilities because of those hardships of theirs, but also the facilities are not designed. They're missing that element of catering for that farmer who won't afford to have the collateral. So we end up missing out on that credit. So we can't afford the quality seeds, we can't afford the quality irrigation systems because we can't get that credit from the financial institutions.
All right, thank you, Arthur. And let me bring in Dr. Kirenga at that point. What opportunities then are there for the public and the private sector, for instance, to where access to credit is concerned? I know your organization, the Southern, is it Growth Corridor of Tanzania? Yeah, Southern Agricultural Growth Corridor of Tanzania is a public, as you mentioned, private-public partnership initiative. So what opportunities for collaboration are there in where access to credit is concerned, where access to those seeds you mentioned earlier is concerned, where access to fertilizer is concerned? I know AGRA deals with consortia. Let me just bring it back to that main question. What opportunities for partnership are there?
Thank you very much. Actually, we have just concluded that these issues of accessing finance in agriculture are major challenges. And there is no way that the government alone will solve it, neither the private sector alone, and neither the financial institutions alone. There is need to create specific partnerships through initiatives like AGRA, but also looking at what is it that the financial institutions are doing in order to facilitate that. We have explored this, and this is what we have done. Normally, in the agricultural sector, you will find that the financial literacy on the side of the production side, where that's where you find most of the farmers, is not that good, as not at the level that is expected. Likewise, issues of agriculture are not well known on the side of the financial institutions. Therefore, what we have been doing is championing partnerships. We collaborate with partners like AGRA to bring together the government, the private sector, and see what is it that we can do together. And we have brought in and developed an initiative which we call Financial Innovation Tools for Agriculture. And that's where people will meet and discuss what needs to be done. And once that is done, you'll find that those participating from the agriculture side will be more informed on what is being provided on the financial side. And in the financial side, they will discover what opportunities are there in the value chain, various value chains. We go to specific value chains, and it is quite interesting to see how many opportunities can be unlocked by just sharing information. That's one example. But of course, another example is to talk to the government and see what kind of measures can be put in order to facilitate the banks to lend more and other financial institutions, but also what measures can be put in place to de-risk the sector and make it more attractive for investment. And when it comes to individual investment, you will definitely see things like most of the farmers and farm organizations have no skills and capacities to develop those somehow complicated proposals that will be funded by financial institutions and those institutions which provide services that de-risks investment in the agricultural sector. And therefore BDS, this is what we call business development services, becomes important. And those ones normally work with small and medium businesses, including small and individual farmers. This is becoming instrumental in unlocking financial opportunities to farmers. But also now we're expanding that, especially on the side of the youth, seeing what technologies are there that can be useful. Actually, sometimes they need small levels of credit to facilitate the investment. And that's an area where there's a lot of dynamism, especially through the use of technologies.
All right, so thank you for bringing in the youth. And John, I'll come to you with the youth just now. But I'm told we also have an audience on Zoom. It is the era of, as I said, it is the digital era and the era of Zoom. So I don't know whether we can see them. I see lots of you have turned off your cameras. Does anybody have their camera on and they can wave at us? Perhaps. I'm waving at you. I know you can see me. Anybody with the camera on and they can wave? Oh, there we go. Wave at us. Yeah, awesome. So you can, via your chat capability, you can text in questions that you have and contributions to the conversation. It'll be fed to me. I have a little earphone in my ear, and I'll get that information too. So do share your thoughts. If you have, we will get to them. All right. Rwanda, my apologies. I left you out. We are also joined by an audience in Rwanda. Thank you very much for making the time to join this conversation. All right, John, and there's a question I asked Dr. Kirenga, which is perhaps your forte. So let's start with that. Opportunities for partnership between the public sector and the private sector. What are those opportunities?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that question. I think there are enormous opportunities, especially in the sectors we are talking about agriculture. When you look at the government, there is a commitment, a strong momentum from our governments in terms of increasing their budget allocation to agriculture sector, and through CADAP, through other initiative. And the reason why the government is doing that, they are putting in place infrastructure to boost the agricultural production, to address some of the issues related to coordination failures within the sector. There is that kind of uptake from the private sector now, given that the government has a number of our countries in the region have invested heavily, have allocated a substantial amount of the budget to build the infrastructure to facilitate the value chain, especially agricultural value chain. So there is a partnership on the private sector to de-risk the sector. You talked about issues of access to finance. I can tell the audience that now the banks, both commercial banks as well as development banks, they have even reduced the interest rate. The interest rate for those who are involved in agribusiness, those the producers themselves, the smallholder farmers themselves, the processors themselves, the traders themselves. So the entire value chain, there is that partnership from the producer to the processors to the traders, downstream to even to the consumers. So that kind of partnership, I think, is very critical, and is because through the partnership you achieve what we call a win-win situation. And there is that realization from both the private sector, including the financial institution, as well as the government, that we need to achieve a win-win situation. One of the panelists from Tanzania mentioned the SAGOT initiative. That's a whole mapping of the sector. There's a lot of value chain. There's rice production. There is the other staples. There is maize. There is all that sector. The involvement of the government of Tanzania is willing to put in place all the infrastructure to boost that sector. And they are calling the private investors to engage and invest in those sectors because there are opportunities. And the banks are able to provide the required finance in terms of that engagement. So that partnership is there. What has been lacking in the entire sector has been the information, especially on the side of the government as well as on the side of the private sector. And that's where we come in as EABC in terms of addressing what I call information asymmetry. Where is that information? Can we have a portal, a digital portal? Generally, yesterday I was on a Zoom call with SADC Chamber of Commerce, where they are saying we need to bring youth, we need to bring youth and women in terms of creating a digital platform where they can share information around the opportunities. And the agriculture sector featured as one of prominent sector where the youth and women constitute almost 70% in that sector. So there's that opportunity for partnership, and the infrastructure required, government is ready to provide the infrastructure required. So my appeal is to both the young investors, both women and the youth, to grab that opportunities. It is the right time as the region is open up for business through the EAC and through the Continental Free Trade Area. It is high time for the youth and women to work together with the government to ensure that those opportunities are realized.
Okay, and it's a good thing you raised the whole issue of infrastructure, because infrastructure is important in terms of minimizing post-harvest losses. All right, Ruth, both John and Dr. Kirenga in Tanzania raised the question of youth. I'm curious, how many of your members fall into the category of youth? I see you representing the female population.
Yeah, in my federation, most of the members are women, followed by youth and even men. But I've realized that women are doing a lot of farming in Kenya, and they make a lot of impact in the society. But currently, we are trying to do a lot of capacity building to the value chains so that they can understand more on what they are doing in the farm. For example, if it is potatoes, we want the farmers to do the value chain so that they don't just suffer to plant and just sell at a throwaway price. So we always make sure that we capacity build them, let them do the farming and even do the value chain so that they can get more money. Secondly, we want to do protection and inclusion, especially when it comes to lending of funds. At times, women don't have the collateral part, so it becomes a bit hard for them to get loans from the banks because they don't have collateral. So as a federation, we really try and tell them to be in groups so that they can be facilitated. I like one thing in our banks because when they're in the groups, they can still get funds without any individual collateral. So as a country or as a federation, our women have done so much. They are, most of them are in groups, followed by the youth. But the only unfortunate thing is that our men don't put themselves in groups. But in Kenya, most of the groups are made of women and youth. And they are making a lot of impact because most of the small-scale SMEs, those are the small, medium enterprises, are giving funds to women and the youth because most of them are in groups. And it has really made a lot of impact. So that is what we are encouraging. Another group which has come up also is a group of persons with disability. They had been forgotten for some time, but when they started being in groups, they started making a lot of impact. And even in one of the regions in the North Rift, we have seen a lot of work because we gave them a small project of sheep, and it is making a lot of impact until even they are starting to learn to other small groups. So we have realized that if they are in groups, they make a lot of impact than individual development.
All right, thank you, Ruth. And Arthur, do come in at that point. Ruth says men are not as willing as women to be in groups as women and youth, but cooperatives is one way in which farmers have customarily, traditionally come together. How effective are they?
Cooperatives are extremely effective, as long as they don't get political in my country. They're extremely effective, and if you know a bit of about Ugandan history, our economy was founded on cooperatives. And of course, for some time, because of political turmoil, cooperatives disappeared. But they've come back into play, and they're actually making quite a huge difference in the lives of farmers, especially farmers up country. So the regions which don't have operating cooperatives actually don't do so well in farming. That's why you see now farming in Uganda is mainly taking off in central, western, and a lot of northern Uganda because of cooperatives. So because they provide the vehicle for the farmers to be able to take their product to market, but also get a good price for the product, and they protect farmers from the typical middlemen who really exploit the farmers, and of course also exploit the downstream client or the consumers. So they are working very well, and I think what we need to do is to strengthen them and build their capacity to even do a lot more, especially cooperatives which give out funds. There are cooperatives which are a hybrid of cooperatives and SACCOs in some of the regions. And like I mentioned earlier, if these facilities could come through those SACCOs, they can get to the rural farmers. And like I mentioned, the rural farmers don't have your typical conditions for getting a loan from a typical commercial bank, but then the SACCO or the cooperative knows how to lend to that farmer without asking for collateral, a physical collateral, so they can lend to them and still collect the money or make the farmer pay back the money using many other methods like reputation, like the culture of honor and shame, or like using group dynamics like village savings groups to make sure they collect the person pays back what he's supposed to pay back to the SACCO or the cooperative. So they are a good foundation for farming, and they need to be encouraged, and especially those which are giving out funds, or those which are actually giving out maybe assets instead of giving out cash. Those which are giving out inputs and equipment for the farmers, they need to be encouraged and strengthened, and they need to be spread across the country. There are some development partners who are doing quite a lot in the cooperative sector. I know SNB does quite a lot of that, but I think now their efforts need to be channeled into the areas where cooperatives are weak, so they can be able to strengthen them and improve their agriculture and productivity in those parts of the country.
All right, thank you, Arthur. Dr. Kirenga, let me bring you in at this point. What way forward? I was looking at some statistics, some numbers on the AGRA website, and it talked about how rapid population poses a challenge for food security, how sub-Saharan Africa runs the risk of extreme poverty concentration come 2050, that is 4 out of every 5 people, and that we need to increase our food production levels by at least 70%. How do we get there if the majority of farmers in East Africa are smallholder farmers, and we have the challenge of the subdivision of land? How do we go about achieving this target?
Thank you. I will come in actually trying to respond to this question using 3 main areas or suggestions. First of all, when you have land fragmentation and you want to increase productivity, there is always an opportunity for land aggregation. And this can be done through block farming. It is very productive and very efficient. And there are so many benefits that can come out of blocking those fragmented pieces of land that actually do not make any economic progress to farmers when they continue farming in that way. It is very, very important to do this, and there are some examples where this has been done successfully. For example, in Tanzania, in tea, and also in some other areas where what sugarcane is produced. It's very, very easy to block, and also in potato producing areas. We have tried this in tea and in potato farmers, and we can see a tremendous increase in productivity and efficiency. And also, it unlocks the farmers to go and do other things. If you have 100 farmers, which were attending 1 acre farms, bringing together those 100 acres, actually 10 farmers can take care of the 100, can take care of those 100 farmers, and then 90 farmers can be engaging in other production, like, for example, building structures, transportation, building houses, but also participating in other income-generating activities. The other one is actually coming together into cooperatives, although you're working in your own farms. One thing which I would like probably the public to know, that Tanzania was the first country in Africa in early 30s to develop cooperatives in Kilimanjaro, and then it went again to the regions just south of Uganda, Bukoba, Kagera area. And then it also went into the cotton growing areas south of Lake Victoria. And that was extremely useful. Most of the people before our generation were actually taken to school through those cooperatives. Public services like transportation, education, hospitals were organized around that particular area. Of course, there is a period where, as my colleague in Uganda said, was a kind of a difficult time for cooperatives. We see the revival now, but also we see the need for increased actual ownership of the farmers in managing those cooperatives. There are various financial cooperatives that are coming up. Here they're formerly known as SACCOs. They're working very efficiently and bringing together the resources that farmers have, and through that they can do things together. The other thing which is with the land fragmentation, even if you don't have the chance to block or to engage in a cooperative environment, you can actually increase production and productivity if you take care of that soil. Just like it has been mentioned earlier, use technologies that will take care of the soil and increase production and productivity, and that will help that particular farmer to realize more income and actually to be able to address challenges like climate change and other similar challenges that farmers are facing at the moment. Let me stop here, and maybe I've tried to respond to this, but it's a major, major issue. Farmers must work together. There is strength in togetherness.
All right, thank you, Daktari. And John, let me come to you at this point. I raised the concern about poverty levels, extreme poverty levels. A lot of us were raised by parents off the back of the, what do I call it, the monies that were made by parents who farmed, right? Mm-hmm. Sold maize. So what potential does investing in the agricultural sector have in lifting people, communities out of poverty?
Thank you for that question. Myself also, I'm from a farming family. I grew and I was educated by a farmer. That is the starting point. Generally, the farming, the smallholders, the issue is not smallholders, farmers. The issue is how do we address barriers that impact or hinder the farming to be an opportunity, the farming to generate the income to the households who are involved in the farming. So there are a range of issues, from the access to inputs, to the production, then to the distribution, to the storage facilities, and to the marketing. If I give an example, for instance, if milk that is produced by your neighbor cannot access the neighbor's market, that's a challenge. So for me, it's not about the size of the land. For me, it is an issue of man-made barriers, what we call non-tariff barriers or technical barriers to trade. We need a kind of a paradigm shift in terms of how we have been treating our traditional agriculture. I'm happy to say that even before I took over this position, I was working with the East African Farmers Federation. And there are a number of tools from the development partners, from the governments, in terms of demonstrating the value we generate, the value proposition from our agriculture sector. But we always, in our communities, in our different actors, they are always creating a barrier at each and every stage. And that frustrates a farmer. As I said, from the production to the farm gate to the processors, there are a number of barriers. So the only way to do, and that's why the farming, even the banks have been so risk-averse in terms of lending to agriculture, because they say they perceive agriculture to be a risk sector, a risk in the sense that, of course, it depends entirely on rainfall, which the rain patterns have changed given the climatic changes in the region and the whole world. That is an aspect, maybe we'll have a discussion on that. But if we are able to address those issues from the production, distribution, marketing, until the product reaches the consumer, then we would be able to see the value proposition from the farming sector. So I think there are range of plant, if they cannot transport their milk from the farm to the market because of these barriers, then everyone gets frustrated. So we need to streamline, and we need to streamline our value, our value chains, especially agriculture-related value chains, from the farm to the market. When you look at the statistics, the post-harvest losses in the region accounts for almost 35% of total outputs. That's a big loss. The cause is that, first I said, the issue of infrastructure. There are no storage facilities. Generally, in my previous job, we were advocating for creating a kind of a green lane for at the borders, where we have one-stop border post. Can we have a green lane for perishable products? Pineapples, maybe from Uganda to South Sudan, vegetables, those are perishable products. Could you make them seamless to cross the border without subjecting them to hassles, customs-related hassles? When you delay a truck that is carrying a perishable for 2 days at the border, carrying pineapples, fresh pineapples, we are talking about youth. Those pineapples are grown by women and by youth. Then we are impoverishing that segment of the society, because we are creating barriers. So there is a need for a mindset shift, a paradigm shift in all actors, from the government, from all the players along the value chain, to address inefficiencies. So to make the sector a viable sector for any investors, either regional or any investors from the rest of the world.
All right. Okay, thank you, John. And we are not finishing that right now. Like I said, I'm handing over to my colleague Smriti Vidyarthi, who's picking up the conversation from 7:30 p.m. after NTV Jioni, which is our Kiswahili news at 7. So yes, so she will be picking up that issue of value addition. So that will be addressed. The hashtag is resilient food systems. Thank you so much even to our Zoom participants. You can use the same link to join our conversation at 7:30 with Smriti Vidyarthi. And quickly, just some feedback. We have Egyptian who says there must be a way to integrate tree planting in our school systems. All kids must plant food systems at 7:30. Let me make way for the Kiswahili news. Haya mambo hayajaisha.
Fix provides freedom of movement for your baby.
Yes, my baby moves easily now.
All babies deserve a high-quality diaper. You should also try Molfix.
This is NTV.
Na hujambo pate vipasho.
Fujo za kulala makao makuu Kenya ikiingia katika wimbi la 4.
Have resolved several issues pertaining to the COVID-19 fight.
Hivi mtu akifika kwenye boda ya Kenya na Tanzania anatakiwa asisumbuliwe kwa lipi ambalo ameshalifanya alikotoka.
Kenya na Tanzania zaahidi kushirikiana zaidi kukabili corona mpakani, huku maambukizi ya leo nchini yakipinda.
When they think different choices are necessary.
Na mpasuko waanza kujitokeza ndani ya UDA, huku naibu rais akiwaita viongozi
mubashara kutoka jumba la NEC.
Karibu sana, shukran sana kwa kuchagua kuwa nasi. Mwenzangu wa ishara ni Flora Atieno. Tukianza taarifa zetu ni kwamba mtu mmoja amefariki kwenye tandabelua ya maandamano mjini Embu kuhusiana na mauaji ya kaka wawili Jumapili iliyopita baada ya kutiwa mbaroni na polisi. Uchunguzi wa maiti hizo mbili umeahirishwa hadi kesho kubaini kilichosababisha vifo hivyo, huku mamlaka ya kutathmini utendakazi wa polisi IPOA ikianza upelelezi. Aidha, mashahidi wawili wa tukio hilo pia wamesimulia yaliyotokea.
Mauaji ya kaka wawili Emmanuel Mutora wa miaka 19 na Benson Njiru wa miaka 22. Machafuko hayo ya ndugu hao ni kwa ndugu hao, biwi la simanzi limetanda akitafuta.
Ben ndiye alikuwa kijana yangu kama ya mkono. Judia anausanga majani chai, anaendea na pikipiki mpaka kahawa ikifunwa, ni yeye ako huko kama manager. Emmanuel naye ndiye anapikanga sana, ananiambia mamu, acha nikupikie shule ikifunguliwa sitakuweko.
Na kama mzazi inaniuma, na mimi singetaka kuongea sana mambo ya hiyo majeraha. It was very painful, sababu moja ubongo inatoka. It's very painful.
Wanaume wawili walioshuhudia Emmanuel na Benson wamefichua kutoka kwa gari likiendeshwa.
Tukihepa zinuka rawali alikuwa ametukamia teke alikuwa naka ni mrefu muscular kiasi. Wewe alikuwa tukamia ilikuwa nakaa na maubaya
Sasa mashoka aligongo na kuna hiyo sauti ya mtu kugongo hiyo. Mimi nilikuwa nimejificha, lakini sasa niliona walieko kwa siti za mbele za gari.
Nilisikia msee amepigwa hiyo sound ya kistaff kimepiga msee hard. Nikatry kujua ni nini, lakini masansi wengine walikuwa wanakaa.
Hata hivyo, mamlaka ya
investigation will be done and the family will get justice.
Marehemu Emmanuel na Benson walikuwa wanafunzi wa masomo ya sheria Jumapili huko Embu walipokuwa wameenda kuwajulia hali wazazi wakati wa likizo fupi shuleni. Nayoma Sampao, NTV.
Na tunatumai kwamba ukweli utabainika kuhusiana na kesi hiyo. Mtazamaji, tukisonga mbele ni kwamba Kenya na Tanzania sasa zitashirikiana moja kwa moja katika kukabiliana na janga la COVID-19. Mpango huo umefanikishwa na